Hey everybody, this is Chris with Overclockersclub, and I'm back again with another cool case from Fractal Design. This is the Meshify S2 compact computer case. Now that's not to confuse this case with the Meshify S2 that I've reviewed in the past. I'll dust that one off and bring it out here to show you the difference between the two cases, or differences. I should say there's more than one. But we'll also be stuffing the good old Celsius S36 360 millimeter all-in-one liquid cooler from Fractal Design into this case, as well as the Fractal Design Ion Plus 660p power supply that's hiding in the back there. All right, so looking at the product specifications here real quick, we've got drive bay capacity. We've got a couple of 3.5-inch drives or 2.5-inch drive trays, it looks like, so you can put either one in there. 4 dedicated 2.5-inch tray positions and 2 trays included. So we'll have to look into that a little more detail. Expansion slot 7, that means we can get a full-size ATX motherboard in there, which is good. So we can go from a mini ITX all the way up to a full-size ATX. Power supply up to 200 millimeters in length. Looks like you got to take some hard drive cages out, or at least one cage, and one front fan installed. Okay, so we'll look at that. Graphics cards, we can go up to if you take the fan out, up to 360 millimeters. CPU cooler, we can go up to 169 millimeters. Tall, water cooling, okay, this is what most people are interested in. We can go up to 360 or 280 in the front. Top, we can go up to 240. Rear 120 and a bottom 120 if you want to put that in there. And again, looks like you've got to shift around some hard drive cages. Fan capacity, we've got 3 120 or 2 140s. Top, we've got 2 120s or 140 millimeter fans supported. Rear, we've got a single 120. Bottom, we've got a single 120. Again, looks like we got to fool around with some hard drive cages. Fans included. Okay, so the front, we've got two, let's see, X2 GP14s in the front. So my guess is those are 140 millimeter fans. And then the rear, we've got a single Fractal Design Dynamic X2 GP12, which is most likely a 120 millimeter fan. Dust filters, front, top, bottom. Front interface, so we've got a USB 3.1 Gen 2, Type C. We've got 2 regular USB 3.0s, audio in and out, power button, reset button. And then the case dimensions there, you can see in millimeters. Now looking at the back, we've got a nice exploded view of the case, and then each point of interest here has a number calling out what it means. So if we look at number 1, which is, let's see, right here. Number 1 is the iconic angular mesh design for unrestricted flow, which is just like on the Meshify S2. So number 2, which is, looks like the back plane. So we got versatile space for efficient ATX form factor. We already talked about that on the side panel. Number 3 is down here. So number 3, we've got the open interior layout, which allows for a smooth airflow path from the front to the rear. Number 4, let's see, where's 4? 4's over here. Seamlessly integrated TG, which is usually tinted glass panel with a steel frame. Latch-free mechanism. 5, fully removable top panel and fan bracket. Okay, so this whole section here opens up, so that's nice, especially when you're building a system, so you have easy access to your components. It's nice to have those things out of the way. Number 6, which is right here, 3 pre-installed Dynamic X2 fans. So we already talked about the 2 140s in the front and the 120 in the rear. Looking at 7, which is here, these are your I/O ports. Again, we already talked about those. And then over here, number 8, which is here, these are your, okay, front panel design with hinged removable mesh filter and tether-free bezel. So it looks like you can pop the whole front bezel off, and you're not stuck with wires and things still attached. All right, so now it's time to get it out of the box. I always like the inside of the Fractal boxes. They're one of the few manufacturers who actually seems to decorate the inside, and I think I remember seeing that on the other Fractal boxes, but just an interesting touch. All right, so I got it out of the box, and looking at all this styrofoam and the big plastic bag is almost as exciting as listening to me read off the feature set from the side of the box. So Let me get all this stuff off of here so we can actually see the case. Oh my, this is nice. This is a gray case. It's not black. That is a very nice looking case. And again, like I said, I'll bring that Meshify S2 out here in a little bit and sort of do a side-by-side comparison, but this really looks nice. Swing around, look at the back. Yep, can't wait to get this open and get the system build rolling with this one. This is probably a removable top section. Yep, definitely a nice looking case. And for anyone who wants to see the bottom of the case, there you go. Has this very nice filter panel that is easily removable. There you can see the slots there for mounting a rear, or I should say a bottom cooling fan. It's very generously vented. And then there are these nice feet with pretty heavy rubber pad there. That's good for keeping the case from sliding around on your floor, as well as isolating any sound or vibration. And they put a nice serial number tag right there. Makes it look all nice and fancy, nice and official. You didn't know it, but some cases actually have serial numbers. So in typical Fractal Design fashion, I like the way they attach their panels. Now, the glass here still has the protective coating on it, so I'll get that pulled off here a little later. But there's these little, it's almost like a little thumb tab you push, and when you push it that way or that way for this panel, the panel pops off. So it's a little stiff because everything's brand new. They pop off. They've got these ball detents here that snap into these little receivers, and then these little tabs at the bottom. So you just sort of lay these tabs in there and then just rotate it up and then push at the top, and it snaps in. And then to remove it, you just pull. And like I said, this one's a little stiff at first, so I'll set this down. And then the back has the same type of arrangement. You just push this, and the back panel comes off. And looking at the back of the case here, I should say the back of the motherboard, you can see we've got a couple of these little mounting plates. These are for your solid state drive. So you mount your drive to this plate, and then the plate, let's see, pops in there like that. And then these screws are retained. And there you go. So we've got two positions for 2.5-inch drives. Down here is another hard drive cage. This is removable, but you've got two trays there, and they can each hold a 2.5-inch drive, solid state drive, or a more traditional 3.5-inch drive. Now I like these cable tracks here that are sort of integrated into the case, and these little Velcro straps open up, and you can see it's got these little built-in guides to help keep your cables lined up a little better and more organized. It just makes for a cleaner build. And then you pull these little straps tight and keep your cables all together. Got a couple of nice grommets here. Now this section of the case right here is actually bumped in a little bit, which gives you more room for your cables, so your cables aren't bulging and pushing on your outer panel. I know a lot of times you get all your cables back here, and when you go to put your back panel on, it's all bulging and hard to get it in there. And then we got the usual accompaniment of your connectors for your top I/O panel. These connect to your motherboard. We have several of these little provisions here, which are for tie wraps to, again, secure your cables on the back. So that's about it going on here. We do have a couple of nice grommets at the top too, and these are important when you're attaching the main CPU power cable to the motherboard. Looking at the back again, we've got the 7 slots. Now you'll notice this one, a lot of cables, at least the current trend, is to have some slots here for vertical GPU mount. Now this particular case does not have that, but there is a lot of room here for airflow, and I do like that. And also there's this removable panel, a little bracket, so your power supply can go in from the back here, and this is really nice. In fact, let me angle that so you can actually see it. All right, so here's the bracket. This attaches to the case, but we've got holes here that are used to attach this to the back of the power supply, and then the power supply can go in from the bottom or the back here. Usually you have to try and slide it in from the side, and that can be kind of a pain, so this is a nice feature. Now, I pointed out earlier that this top comes off, so let's see, it looks like there's a place. Let me push up, see what happens here. Oh, yep. Oh, that was easy. So this has the same ball detents here that pop into some little receivers on the top. So we got 6 of them. And then, so this entire panel here is your filter panel. So this mesh piece doesn't really come out. It's sort of, you could take it out, but I would not, because these tabs bend, and I would just leave that panel, or leave that mesh section in. I wouldn't try to take that out. But looking at the top here, actually it's easier just to move the camera right over to it. So here's what the top of it looks like. So you can see there's the mesh top panel. Let's see, this looks like it just sort of pops back, maybe. Maybe not, let's see. I haven't had this out before, so, oh, there we go, yep. Okay, so you can see the way the little tabs catch there. Big thing with removing this, you want to be careful, because if you have a lot of dust accumulated on there, well, if you pop it off there too aggressively, then your dust will go flying through the air. So here is the top removable bracket, so you can attach your radiator or fans to this bracket, and it looks like we've got a couple screws right there. So there's one there and one on that side, so I will get those out, and then maybe, okay, so those are rivets there, so that's not part of the bracket. And also in the back of the motherboard tray we have these different hole locations for studs. So you relocate these little studs or these standoffs to these other locations based on what motherboard form factor you're using. Now looking at the front, or in from the inside toward the front, you can see those are 2 140mm fans. And these sections here can be removed based on whether you want to put another fan at the bottom, or if you are using a front radiator, you'll need to allow room for that. And then something else to point out, I know people often ask me, the rear fan is a 3-pin, and then the 2 front fans are also 3-pin fans. So there's one connector and there's the other one. And something else that's really cool here, are you ready? Watch this. This is your front panel, and look at that, it's hinged. That is so cool. Want to close it, just pop it shut. And if you want to open it, just pull there, and it opens right up. That is nice. Alright, so you might be saying, well, what if I want to take it off to clean it? Can I do that? Well, you sure can. The hinges, if I can do this with one hand, the hinges pop right off. There we go. See, you can even do it with one hand, but you can see the hinges there. Not terribly complex, but certainly will get the job done. And after you have this front filter panel, or this front mesh panel, removed, there's actually a secondary filter panel inside there, because if you look at the mesh there, that's pretty coarse. You're not going to catch a whole lot of dust with that. So you have a much finer screen there as a removable panel, which sits just behind the front mesh panel. Alright, so enough with the front panel. Now we can take a look at the chassis here, the front frame, and you can see we've got 2 sets of slots. So this is for a 120mm fan, and these are for 140mm fans, or 120mm wide radiator, or 140mm wide front radiator. Now normally you wouldn't have to take this front bezel off, but it does pop off. Now I already popped it off there. It takes a little bit of force because these plastic cylindrical pieces pop into these holes here, and it takes a little bit of force to pop it off there. And like I said, normally you really wouldn't have much of a reason to take that off there, but there's what the front of it looks like with that removed. And really pretty much everything I've shown you so far is covered quite clearly in the user guide here. And I tell you, Fractal really puts together a nice manual here, a nice user guide with their illustrations. They're very clear, and they color code everything, or at least they highlight what your the point of interest here, what they're focusing on, so it's very clear what's going on. So there's removing all the panels, how everything goes together. This is just very nice. For example, this section here covers how you remove that front panel that I was showing you, and it shows you how you replace it. And I'm assuming this is showing the hinges. Either the hinges are popping back in or there's an explosion. I'm going to go with the hinges are just popping back in. So, like I said, this is really a very comprehensive manual. Now here in the back under additional info, this is where a lot of people ask questions as far as fan mounting, fan coverage. So you can see 120 millimeter fans. There's one included at the back here, but you can see you could put 2 at the top, 3 at the front, 1 at the bottom. 140 millimeter fans, which there are 2 included at the front. If you wanted to, you could put 2 at the top. And then as far as water cooling is concerned, you've got a 120 millimeter, a 240 millimeter at the top. Put a 120 in the rear, put a 120 at the bottom. And in the front, we've got 360, 280, 240, 140, and 120. They're all capable of fitting in the front of the case there. And then over here, looking at possible water cooling setups. Again, you've got a top 240, and here's a 360 by 120. So you got a 240. Actually, what they're showing here. Okay, so they're going 240 long by 120 wide, and then 360 by 120 wide for the front, those are pretty standard sizes. The same here, 240 by 120 and 280 by 140 in the front. So anyway, that pretty much covers that part of it. And these 2 pieces I was showing you earlier pop out, so we've got clearance there. Of course, if you do put a front radiator in there, at least a tall one, you're going to have to remove your hard drive cage, and that one pops out too. Alright, so I think we're pretty much ready to start with the system build. I guess actually I need to pull the hardware box out here. We'll take a quick look at it. Now I set the case down on the sides because I'm going to take this hard drive cage out for a couple of reasons. One, to just show you how it comes out. So you take these 4 screws out and show you why it's necessary for a radiator install, because I'm going to be putting that Celsius S36 in here very soon. And I have the case flipped back over. Now this hard drive cage, once it's loose in there, as long as the hard drive trays are still in the frame, you'd think it would come out this way, but it doesn't want to, and it won't come out. It won't come out the back like this either. But what you do is you slide it forward, take your power supply bracket off, which increases the size of that opening. Of course, these 4 screws here, don't lose these. These are what hold that hard drive cage in, and they're these heavy flange head screws, so don't lose those. But anyway, now it will come out from the back here. As you can see, and I usually don't have that hardware box in there, but it comes right out the back like that. And then to get the tray out, you just loosen that fastener there, and these slide right out, and you can see all the mounting holes there for your 2.5 or 3.5 inch drive. So there's the hardware box, and inside the hardware box is a little cleaning cloth for the glass, and we've got some tie wraps, motherboard screws, and rubber grommets for mounting your hard drives to the little hard drive trays to keep vibration down, things like that. And now I think I'm ready to start the system build. Alright, so the motherboard is installed. A couple points I want to make if you're a first-time system builder is you see all of the screws that secure the motherboard. What you don't want to do is start one screw and then tighten it down, and then start the next screw and tighten it down, because what will happen is sometimes the other holes don't quite line up exactly. So what you need to do is start your screws, but don't tighten them all the way down. Leave them a little loose so that the motherboard can sort of shift around a little. And after you get all the screws in there, then you can tighten them down. And when you're doing that, always be careful. Don't push too hard with your screwdriver, and actually use two hands. Use one hand down here at the tip to sort of hold it in position, because what you don't want to do is drag the screwdriver across the motherboard if you slip. And finally, this case is sort of an exception since the top is all open, but a lot of times you need to get the cables for your power supply already run up here, depending upon the motherboard, but usually there's a power header up here somewhere along the top. Sometimes there are two of them. And if you get everything installed, especially if you have a radiator at the top, you'll find that you can't get your hand in there to get this power plug on there to supply the CPU with power. So again, this case is open, so you don't have to worry about that, but other cases you just have to sort of get your power cables run ahead of time and plugged in. So the power supply we're using is the Ion 660p from Fractal Design. It's a 660 watt power supply. And what you usually want to do, especially on a modular power supply, is try to figure out which cables out of the cables that are supplied you're going to need, because once you get the power supply installed, it's really hard, or I should say it can be hard, to get your hand in there to get some of these plugged in. So if you get them plugged in ahead of time, when you put the power supply in, all that work is done. Alright, so I'm ready to get the power supply in there, but there are two ways you can do it. You can have it with the fan facing down and the fresh air will be drawn in from the venting on the bottom of the case, or you can put it in there with the fan facing up. Now, if you put it with the fan facing up, the only thing you have to be careful is if you have venting in the top of the case here, you just got to be careful you don't drop any screws or anything down in there, because it will go straight into your power supply and you might get a nice little fireworks show, so you don't want to do that. And the only reason, usually, if I put the fan facing up, is just so that I can see the fan spinning and I know that the fan is working. Of course, that's assuming you can see it. A lot of cases now have these power supply shrouded areas and you can't even see it, so it really doesn't matter. So anyway, that's really the difference between putting the fan facing up or the fan facing down. So I'm going to put it facing down in this particular build. Now I attached this bracket already to it. You can just push that in. Make sure I don't pinch any cables. That's another thing I wanted to say about the motherboard. When you put the motherboard in, it's real easy. I'll show you here. It's real easy to pinch like one of these fan cables behind the motherboard. Sometimes there are other cables that get back there and you don't realize they're there until you're tightening the screws, and you're trying to figure out why the motherboard isn't sitting flat. Well, that's because you've got something pinched behind it. So just be real careful. And the other thing with putting the fan facing up, a lot of these power supplies now are 0 RPM, which means when the load is low, the fan doesn't even run, even though the power supply is working. So you can't gauge whether the fan is running or not as to whether your power supply is functioning. So just keep that in mind also. Power supply is installed, everything is hooked up. I got all of the case I/O connectors plugged in, except actually I need to put the connectors on there so the push button start works. But what I wanted to do is sort of do some test fitting. Now obviously a 360 won't fit in the top, so it's made for the front. And it is all powered up. Of course it's not very pretty there with all the panels off, but you can see the two 140 millimeter fans there at the top that came from the factory in the front, but now we have the 360 millimeter radiator in the front. And I tried with the radiator flipped over and the hoses at the bottom just to see if it would fit, and it does fit until you get the graphics card in there, and then these lines just aren't quite long enough to make it around the graphics card. So if you run with onboard graphics, you can do that, but if you have a graphics card in there that's anywhere near a standard size, you'll have to put the radiator in that orientation. And of course, there's really nothing wrong with that. And looking at the back side of the motherboard, my cable management is not exactly perfect, but for now it gets the job done. So let me pop the panels back on there so we can see what everything looks like. All right, now it's time to get the panels all in there. This is so easy, even I can do it. So we'll start with the bottom filter panel. It just slides in like that. And I already put the front bezel on, it just pops on. Then there's the top section. Remember, it has the ball detent, so this just pops into position very easily, very nicely. And next is the front. If you remember, this swings on these little hinges here. So you just line those up and pop them into position. One, two, three, like that. There it is, closed. There is that, I forgot to point that out earlier. There's this white LED bar there. That's your power bar that indicates that the power was on. And really that's about it other than the side panels, so I'll get those on next. All right, so we'll take a quick look around the case here now that it is all together. The hard part with the glass, it is so reflective, it's hard not to capture everything else in the background in the glass, and makes it a little hard to see what's going on in there. And some people see these here dangling. I destroyed my my regular microphone, and these earbuds surprisingly work pretty well in a pinch. So until I get a new microphone, they'll just have to work for now. But anyway, so when we look at this case, of course the big thing that stands out really are the RAM modules there with the bright RGB stuff going on. But this is really an exercise in less is more. So many cases now are just totally saturated with the RGB stuff, and you know, I like it, but it can be a little overwhelming sometimes, and for a little more of a subtle statement here, this case definitely gets the job done. And here it is from the back again. You can see I like the fact that we do have some slots here so you can slide your fan up or down a little bit if you need to make some room for like a top radiator. And this section here, even though it doesn't come with any provisions for a vertical GPU mount, it still is generously vented. And of course there's the side glass panel, and again with all the reflection. I love the glass, but sometimes it's a little hard to see in there. But you get the idea. All right, so we're getting toward the end here, and what I'll do is do a little fan tuning and then crank the fans all the way up. Of course, we'll have the two 140 millimeter fans right there at the top, and then the three 120 millimeters at the front. So I expect you're going to hear a little bit of sound when they're all running at full speed, but that is, of course, to be expected. And then the next thing I'll do is do a little thermal testing. I'll stress the CPU and GPU, build up a little bit of heat, although with the radiator in the front there and as well ventilated as the front is, I really would expect this thing to perform right at the high end of everything, because your airflow, you're bringing your ambient right in, your airflow right through the very front of the case. So as far as keeping your CPU cool, you should be good. And then since this is a reference card, it's a blower style card, it's sucking air in from the blower fan and pushing it directly out the back. So heat buildup inside the case should be really minimal. And as promised, here are the two Meshify cases next to each other. On the left is the Meshify S2, and on the right is the Meshify 2 Compact. You can see they're very close in height. In fact, the new case here is about a ½ inch taller than the old case. So if we look at the overall height here, this case is coming in right at about 18 and a quarter. And this case is coming in at about 18 and, if I can get over there, about 18 and 3/4. So there's about a ½ inch difference, with this little guy being just slightly taller. Now, as far as the width, you can see this one here is considerably wider. This one's coming in at about 9 and a quarter. And this one here, there's a little bit of taper at the top. But this one is closer to a little past 8 and a quarter, maybe 8 3/8 on the width. So what that really translates to on the larger case here, with the additional width, you can put a taller air cooler in there. You've got room at the top for larger radiators, and of course you've got much more hard drive space in the front half of the case. As well as they've incorporated this cool opening door on the front, whereas the Meshify S2, this is just a solid panel. So they are both great cases, but one is just a little bit bigger than the other. I think I forgot to measure the depth here. This is another dimension here I know people will want to know before I forget. So this case here is coming in at about 21 inches, and the smaller case is closer to 16 and a quarter. So anybody who is interested in that, if you're trying to fit a case in a small space, you'll need to know those dimensions. The I/O panel between the two cases is pretty much the same. So like I said, both great cases. And of course, I'll post the link in the description to the review for the Meshify S2. All right, now I got to get it off the table and get back to the Meshify 2 Compact. All right, so I have the fans cranked up all the way just so you can get an idea of the fan noise. And of course, any system, when you crank the fans all the way up, you're going to hear them. So I've got my decibel meter here. So that's with the fans cranked all the way up, about 53, 54. Let me shut the fans down. You can see the difference. And fans cranked up, full speed. And like I said, you know, any system when you crank the fans all the way up, you're going to hear them. Now again, I have the radiator fans there from the Celsius S36 cranked up. Normally you would have the two 140 millimeter fans in the front, but they're on top. As far as noise there, I mean, they're quieter than the front, but nothing here really jumps out as a concern as far as fan noise though. And like I always say, you know, everybody's test system, or everybody's system I should say, will be different probably from my test system. So the usual, your mileage will vary disclaimer. I always throw that in there. So now I'll go ahead and stress the CPU, put a little heat in the case, crank the fans up, and look at the temperatures. Again, I don't expect to see anything out of the ordinary. I know how this Celsius S36 cooler performs, so let's just see. And while this thing is shaking and baking, here are the system specs for my system build here. Room temperatures around 67, 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Alright, so with everything cranked up, the overclock at 4.9 gigahertz, I'm running around 60, 61 degrees Celsius, 59. It sort of bounces around there, which is about what I expect, especially when the fans are pulling, you know, air through the filter panel there. So I would say airflow through the case is just fine. Two 140 millimeter fans, I can feel they're pushing lukewarm air out the top. And right now I want to go over some of the features in a little more detail. Sometimes I see in comments, there'll be in the questions and comments, I'll think, boy, didn't I cover that in the review? And I go back and look and it's like, oh yeah, I either completely missed it or I just sort of glanced over it. So um, in the interest of clarification, looking at the drives here in this first slide, I guess we'll call it, if you look at the very top, you can see that there actually is room up there for 2 hard drives, and I didn't cover that earlier. It requires 2 special brackets that you have to purchase separately, but you can put 2 hard drives up there at the top if you want. And normally the next image there toward the right, you can see the 2 hard drives shown at the bottom, and those are of course in the hard drive cage. It's included. You don't have to do anything special to mount them there. And then the other 2 images at the top right there, they sort of show those hard drives at the top. And if you take the entire hard drive cage out, you can still mount a 3.5-inch drive to the very bottom of the case if you want. Now, looking at the 2 images at the bottom there, it's basically showing you that you can put the 2 2.5-inch solid state drives either on the floor of the case there, which is the top of the power supply shroud, or behind the motherboard tray. And again, those are just standard mounting positions there. It does say that you need some SSD brackets there if you want to mount them on top of the power supply shroud. And those brackets are, of course, sold separately. Moving on to the next slide here is the radiator support. And this shows you where you can mount a radiator and what size. So the first place most people mount a radiator is either in the front or the top. So looking at the top, you've got room for a 120 or a 240. At the front, you've got all the way up to a 360, which is what I showed here in this review. Next is a 280, a 240, a 140, and all the way down to a 120. You can also put a 120 in the floor. At the very bottom, you can also put a 120 at the rear. Now you notice those 2 radiators are shown in blue. They're just highlighting those to show you there are some restrictions for size. If we look at the top radiator, the 240, they're just saying that you've got a limit on your ram height, your heat spreaders of 40 millimeters, or you may run into some issues there hitting the radiator. Now looking at the front, the 280 and the 140 are highlighted because they're showing that there's a max of 145 millimeters on the width for this particular case. On to the next slide. This sort of shows you some of the details for the 2 fans, or actually the 2 styles of fans. There are actually 3 fans included, the 120 millimeter in the rear and then the 2 140s at the front. And really the big difference between these fans, other than the physical size, you've got a higher spinning, smaller fan. The 120 can go up to 1200 RPMs and the 140 goes up to 1000. The 140, of course, no surprise, can move more air. And moving on to the fan positions here, you can see you've got space at the top for 2 140s, which I showed. The front comes with, of course, the 2 140s already mounted there. And then if we look at the right image there, it shows where the 120 fans can be mounted if you want to go with all 120. So you got the 120 millimeter fan already at the rear. You can put 2 at the top, 3 across the front, and 1 at the bottom if you like. And the case is available, or will be available, in a few different colors. This is the gray, but there's also a black and a white version of this case. And they all have the tempered glass. You can get it tinted or clear, depending upon which model. And they all retail for the same price. $109.99 is the list price. And again, for a case like this, I think that is a decent price. So I would give this the Overclockers Club Editor's Choice Award. It's a great little case. It's got plenty of room, and it's a breeze to work on. Your system build is just so nice the way you can just take this whole top panel off and the radiator bracket off. Very nice. I like the way the front door section here opens. You can take this panel out. Of course, you got to take the door off to get the dust panel out. Got a bottom dust filter down here. I just like the case. It's great. So that wraps up another great case from Fractal Design. This is Chris with Overclockers Club. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Questions or comments, just leave them below.